Okay. Oh, she did it.
Mute myself. All right, there we go. And Kathy, you have to unmute yourself.
Yep. Okay, we are live.
Well, welcome to Chat and Chew. And this is our second meeting, and we're so glad you're here with us. And welcome to those people on our YouTube page, as well as those that are on our Facebook Live this time. We are so excited. We have a great program designed for you today. And Brian Hart is here. And I just want to tell you a little bit about Brian. Brian is the executive director of the Esselstyn Foundation. And it's such a special foundation because it is really an Esselstyn thing. You know, so many of us have benefited from the Esselstyn family in lots of ways. For example, Jane and Anne have Zoomed with us in the past. I remember one day I ran into Anne in a meeting and she sat down with me and I showed her our calendar and what we did. And she made suggestions on what we might want to add to the calendar. Dr. Esselstyn Zoomed with us back January. This family is just such a giving family, and the Esselstyn Foundation, Family Foundation, is what that's all about too. So they formed a foundation that shares with those who wouldn't normally get the good news about the power of the plate. And Brian is the executive director of that, but he's done a lot in his life. And so I've asked Brian if he'd kind of catch us up on it and how it's like being an Esselstyn now. Even though his last name is different. So Brian, welcome as you talk with us about how we can help our loved ones that may be male or not, and we want them to know about the power plants.
All right, well, first off, thank you so much for inviting me to speak. It's been so interesting during these COVID times where suddenly all the Esselstyn Foundation programming has been moved online. So it's so nice to talk to a group that I know I'm not probably going to have to do too much heavy convincing that plant-based eating is a good option. If you're here, most likely you're at least beyond plant curious, we like to say. You're actually moving in a direction of it. You're probably on the lifestyle, or you're seriously considering it to the point where this is probably just, you're going to hear a lot of information today that just confirms what you already know, which is good, because we all need that. I still learn new things every time I hear Dr. Esselstyn speak, and I've probably heard him speak. He's my father-in-law, so I've probably listened to him speak maybe 100 times, and I still learn so much more. So I married into this crazy family. And so when I met Jane, I was a vegetarian, but I was kind of a junk food vegetarian. I became a vegetarian because I was a marathon runner at the time, and I thought it was healthier, so I did that. But I ate a lot of crappy food, and like many of us, you sort of fall into that trap because remember, chips and salsa and Oreos are in fact plant-based. So you can get away with that, which no one really wants to admit, but it's true. So I was one of those types of plant-based eaters. And then I met Jane, and of course my world got rocked on a lot of different levels. And one of them was to meet her family and to learn all about the research that Dr. Esselstyn had. And people often ask, as part of your prenuptial agreement, did you have to have your cholesterol checked? The answer is no, that was not part of our prenuptial agreement, but I think it would have been within the realm of consideration. And so I married into this family, and I'm an educator by training. So I've spent 25 years I started off as an outdoor educator. Then I worked in classroom education. I did some administrating. I was a full-time principal for 5 years. And then, so once I sort of burned out on that about 4 or 5 years ago, I decided it was time to switch, and we decided to start this foundation. And as Kathy said, it was really about trying to get the message of plant-based eating out to those people, especially those people who might not be able to afford it, who might not be able to attend an immersion, or might not have the flexibility in their life to be able to sort of jump on a chat and chew call in the middle of the day. You know, we're trying to get this plant-based message out to people. And as we know, the health demographics and statistics in this country are very troubling. And I'll talk a little bit about that during my presentation, but that's our focus, that's our hope. And so we have 3 plant-based kids. All of them are home right now, which for those of you who remember or know what it's like to have teens and early 20-year-olds in the house, nobody's happy. Nobody wants to be here. They don't want to be hanging out with their parents right now. So it's quite interesting right now to have everybody home. college, we're hoping college is gonna start up again in the fall. I think it's gonna be some really weird situations. So anyway, my presentation today, I think see if we can do the advanced move here, and I can share my screen. And then the Chat and Chew folks, the Chat and Chew administrators are going to have to tell me if they can see it. Is it full screen? Are we good? Can someone unmute and let me know?
Yes, it's perfect. It's
All
perfect.
good.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. All right. Now you'll notice the chat box is open. So if people want to throw something on there while we're just, I'm going to actually, this is an interactive, as a longtime educator, there's nothing worse than a person that just lectures and there's no interaction. And I know it's a little more clumsy on Zoom, but there will be some moments where I'm going to ask you all to respond. So if you open up your chat box, we can have a little bit of a discussion in a couple places, and I'll be able to read them. And then I think Kathy or Vicky are going to read out some comments sometimes as I'm talking, which is fine. I want this to be interactive. I don't want this to just be me spewing knowledge, because, you know, collectively we're all much smarter together than we are as individuals. And I really truly believe that this is a collaborative effort, and we should all be weighing in. You know things that I don't know, and I'm sure you all have come up with tricks of trade, if you will, that are very effective. So I'd love to hear those things. So my presentation is called "Getting the Men We Love Off of Meat." And the reason I developed this presentation, as you probably already know, is that we've got a bit of a meat problem with the men in our country, in the world really, but I'll stick to the United States. And I'll talk about some of those statistics in a moment. And what's so interesting is as you start to deconstruct it, really, research, some social research has really discovered some interesting things about that. And that's what this is all about. So first off, I feel like it's important to note that when we talk about gender, I realize automatically I'm stepping on a bunch of mines, if you will. I'm tripping over some challenging situations, which is to generalize about one gender as always one thing or another. And please know that I know how nuanced it is. And so just to kind of do this is almost like a disclaimer, but our understanding of gender is complex and nuanced. It continues to evolve. Today's discussion involves dissecting behaviors that one might typically call traditionally male. And again, stereotypes are all based on some kernel of truth. And so I think it is important to recognize that at least culturally, men have developed in a way in this country that we could call traditionally male. However, it's important to note that what we really are discussing today is all applicable to talking to anybody that you want to try to get to make healthier food choices. So it fits in no matter their gender identity. And we all realize that that's a spectrum. But I just wanted to make sure that everybody understands that. Does anybody have any comment about that they'd like to add, or is everyone comfortable with that?
I think, Brian, it also relates to athletes, that they, because I've heard women say to me, "Oh, you got to be sure and get enough protein. You got to eat enough, animal." They don't call them animal products, but yeah, I think.
Sure, but I think it's this male thing that we're trying to deconstruct today. But really, when you get down to it, you strip it all away. It's really about somebody who just is not willing to really accept the studies and the science for a variety of different reasons, which are human reasons, not necessarily gender reasons. But again, like, we're focusing on traditionally male behaviors here. So let's discuss for a moment here. Think for a moment, and I want the chat box to fill, if you don't mind. Think for a moment, what memories do you have of men, either yourself or men you know, and your or their relationship to meat preparation and consumption? So let's see. My dad loved it almost raw, cooking on the grill. Good, good. Keep filling that chat box. We'll take a couple of minutes here, or a minute or so. Grilling is the guy's domain. Excellent. The plate is not complete without meat. He didn't have to deal with the raw meat, the yuck factor. Makes them as if they feel strong. Fishing, good. Fishing.
I think that's the biggest thing, Brian, that that comment from Lori. That was Valerie. Valerie, thank you for saying that. Because, when we have to fix the chicken, it's just so gross.
Yeah. Yeah. Isn't that interesting that the domain of the woman is to prep it, but the guy is to put it on the fire? Carving, that's actually a great one. So in my wife's family, back before the Esselstyns went plant-based, there was this great Uncle Bob that every time Thanksgiving came around, he was the guy. He brought his own special carving equipment that was like this age-old family tradition, and he would unwrap these sort of like antler handled cutting device, knife, and he'd sharpen it up, and it was this whole thing. Carving was this big male thing. It was only like the oldest male in the family had to carve. Hunting, sure. There's a whole hunting culture around meat, and I get that. My grandfather was a big hunter. Anything else? Men is made by God to eat meat, improve his masculinity. Okay, good. Muscularity. Yeah, there's very much of a like proving that you are a man by killing, stalking, getting your own meat. And then there's all that crazy ritual where there was like back in in certain Native American tribes, it was important to sort of take out the heart, and that in your first kill, you were supposed to eat the liver or the heart or something like that.
Lori said that it's the feature of the plate, that whole idea that, well, where's the food? When you put the plate before them, and there's nothing on there that's meat related.
Exactly. Very good. Men are hunters, women are gatherers. Nice. My dad didn't think he had a meal if there wasn't meat and potatoes. Excellent. The old meat and potatoes. I love it when someone describes themselves. I'm a meat and potatoes guy. That's an interesting statement in itself. All right, so let's move on. These are great. You guys all get it. So interestingly, probably most of your memories, mine included, probably have something to do with concepts like this, right? Real men use charcoal. They are out there grilling. It's a chance for men to actually socialize, because it's an important thing to remember that, and again, I'm generalizing, but I find in my own life, but also, if you look at some of the studies around behaviors of men seem to bond over activities, whereas women often can really just bond over connection. So I know this is very true of my wife, like just connecting with people. She wants to connect with other women. But when if you get a bunch of guys together and say, hey guys, let's connect, you're not going to get one person, at least in my experience, to sign up. But if you say, hey, I'm building a new porch, could you come over and help me? That's a great way to get men together, because it's an action, and it's something that they can do together. And then during that time, they will bond, they will talk about things they wouldn't usually talk about, as long as it's around an activity. And I think for men and grilling, that's very similar. I found this picture, which cracked me up, but if you go on the internet and search men grilling, this is the kind of stuff you find. So clearly this gentleman's feeling very good about himself. I'm not sure why he's saving the other half of his body for no tattooing, but I thought it was a great shot that sort of sums it all up. All right, so let's consider some of these statistics here. So the United States ranks highest in meat consumption, consuming about 216 pounds per person. Australia is a close second. So we eat the most meat in the world. Men eat the most meat, consuming a roughly 57% more meat than women. So really, dudes, we've got a meat problem, right? According to the U.S. National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey, and a Vegan Society survey found that 63% of vegans are female, while only 37% are male. So somebody wrote on the chat, somebody's eating my 216 pounds. That's right. Remember, that's an average. So per capita. So if most of the people on this call are not eating meat, boy, someone's eating 400 pounds. All right. So let's look at some health statistics. I know for some of you this is review, but heart disease, #1 cause of death for men. Roughly 350,000 men a year die of heart attack. Percent of men over 20 with type 1 hypertension, 31%. More than 58,000 men die of a stroke every year. 80% of sudden cardiac events occur in men, which is pretty fascinating. So if you know, talking about just out of the blue heart attacks, those people that are playing tennis and then they drop dead, 80% of those events are men. And men are much more likely to develop heart disease 10 to 15 years earlier than women, and are more likely to die of it in the prime of their life. And another statistic to add that I didn't put on this is that 6% of people who have heart attacks outside of the hospital, only 6% live, which is shocking. I think we often think about what we see on television, which is the ambulance gets there really quickly, they do CPR and they bring people back, but actually only 6% of the people who have heart attacks outside of the hospital will survive. And that's a full heart attack, not just, you know, a little bit of angina or like a mini heart attack. We're talking about the full scale one. So that's pretty shocking. So why should we care? Well, the Harvard School of Public Health has already said this study provides clear evidence that regular consumption of red meat contributes substantially to premature death. There's been some pushback on this study, as there is with every piece of nutritional study. Every nutritional study gets pushback because notoriously nutritional studies, there's a lot of factors that are very difficult to control. So for instance, if someone is not a smoker and they eat a more healthy diet, you know, it's very difficult. But in general, the studies just replicate over and over and over again. More vegetables you eat, the healthier you're going to be. The EPIC study found processed meat consumption led to 72% increased risk of dying from heart disease and 11% increased risk of dying from cancer if you're eating processed meats. And according to the World Health Organization, a diet high in meat, particularly if it's cooked well done. So there's something about burning meat that is associated with an increased risk of prostate cancer, second most common cancer in men. And this is most likely due to heterocyclic amines, which are carcinogens found in cooked meat. So when you cook meat, you actually stimulate the production of these HCAs, which are linked to cancer growth. Now, does this happen in vegetables? No, it does not. If you grill vegetables, the HCAs are not present. So it's something about grilling meat itself. That's something that, so really, that's so fascinating to think that men's major, you know, focus is around this grilling concept, yet that's when you make it the most dangerous in terms of your health, is the actual grilling of meat. So ironic, synchronic. Now let's add in the COVID piece. I'm sure all of you have been, like I have, consuming so much about COVID, but as we've learned, the CDC, COVID-related complications and or death is significantly higher, in some cases 6 times higher, for people who have pre-existing conditions of cancer, obesity, a BMI of 28 or higher. Now this is a fascinating statistic too, because the average American has a BMI of 29, and yet the cutoff for a six-time increase in risk factors, in complications for COVID, actually is 28. So really, if you're an average American, you already have a higher chance of developing complications. Heart disease, such as hypertension, coronary artery disease, congestive heart failure, and type 2 diabetes. So this is why we're seeing higher death rates, often among marginalized, more impoverished communities, and often coming out racially. So why the death rate, for instance, in Chicago has been significantly higher for African Americans, because sadly, many of them do live with chronic health conditions that make them at a higher risk. Also, there's some correlation also with other diseases as well, but we're talking about lung diseases and things which make it especially. But isn't it interesting that all of these, we know that all of these can be prevented or reversed using a plant-based diet? And so our COVID situation is simply turning up the volume on this message that what you eat does matter, and COVID really is pointing that out more than ever. So our essential question, I'm a longtime teacher. For those of you who've been in the education world, when you're a teacher, you often think about what's the most important question. So the question we're trying to answer here is, how can we persuade men in our lives or loved ones in our lives to make better food choices, especially regarding rates of meat consumption? It's really what we're trying to offer. So quickly, I know I'm preaching to the choir, but do men need meat? That's always the question. Well, some might say they need it because it makes them feel satisfied, it makes them feel full. But in the end, health-wise, we know that the ADA American Dietetic Association has come out and said this straight out. Appropriately planned plant-based diets, including vegan diets, are healthful, nutritionally adequate, and they can prevent all kinds of diseases in all stages of life: pregnancy, lactation, infancy, childhood, adolescence, and even for athletes. So we know, at least from the ADA, which is one of the most respected organizations in the country in terms of dietary recommendations, that this is okay. Secondly, People's Committee for Responsible Medicine states this. You've heard it a lot, I'm sure, is that a varied plant-based diet of whole grains, vegetables, beans, etc., gives you all the protein you need in your day. Maybe I should, I don't know if I need to address this, but I feel like every talk I ever give, I have to mention it at some point, that Americans eat about 35, get most of their daily intake calories from 35% from protein, and the actual amount you need in your day is around 10%. So we are tripling, if not quadrupling, the amount of protein we're eating in a day. And high protein diets are directly associated with increased risks for all of these diseases that we're talking about. So when you eat more protein, it often comes in the form of meat, and you're just adding all these risky behaviors to your health, and you are compromising your health by doing so.
Brian, isn't it breast milk is something like 5% protein?
Exactly.
That's
yeah.
the largest growth period.
Exactly. Breast milk is usually under 10%, and it is what's built for growing humans. So if you think about it that way, when we're growing the most in our lives, then you really don't need, the amount of protein you need is very low. And athletes often think they need more. I'll talk about this a little bit later, but we have some friends in the plant-based movement who are these big time bodybuilders, and we do know that they use plant-based protein powders. So it's like a pea isolate that they use when they're really trying to pack on muscle, but that's an extreme case. So your average human does not. The only time people get protein deficiencies is if they're starving to death. If you've ever seen pictures of starving people with like children with distended stomachs, that's a starvation. That's kwashiorkor, and that distended stomach is often a protein deficiency. But that's also, it's a starvation issue. It's not an issue of did they forget to take their protein supplement, or this protein deficiencies don't occur in developed countries unless you're talking about elderly populations where they're just not eating enough. And so sometimes elderly populations will be given those protein shakes and things, those drinks like Ensure, and that's because they're just not eating enough. It's not an issue of, if you're eating plenty of fruits and vegetables and nuts and legumes, you are fine. You're getting plenty of protein.
I don't remember which plant-based peep it was, but somebody made the statement that there are no hospital wards for people who didn't get enough protein.
That's right. That's right. It's not a chronic condition in the United States yet. Isn't it interesting how all of our friends suddenly become these biochemists? As soon as we say we're going plant-based, suddenly they're very concerned about our protein intake, while they're consuming these giant cheeseburgers in front of us, thinking that they're the healthy ones. It's just so crazy. I mean, I know I'm preaching to the choir, but it is just so comical.
When I'm asked about where I get my protein, I like to come back with, where do you get your fiber?
Yeah, exactly. Well, as it was, Doug Lisle has a great joke. He says, we recycle, our bodies recycle our protein quite a bit. And so your clever answer could be, where do you get your protein? I get it from human flesh, which is your own flesh. so that'll always leave them thinking. So what's the real deal with men and meat? Well, they don't need it. We know that. It's not good for them. But they'll tell you, but it tastes so good. It tastes so good. But so does ice cream. Nobody eats ice cream at every meal. And this is an important one to remember. I mean, like the fact that we in the United States just swim in the amount of meat we eat, bacon and eggs for breakfast, some sort of lunch meat sandwich for lunch, dinner, some big steak, a piece of chicken. I mean, it's like we're eating ice cream at every meal, if you want to think about it that way. And nobody eats ice cream at every meal. They eat it as a treat. They eat it in the summer, once a week, once a month. And later on, we can talk about the possibility of the place of meat in a healthy diet, which I think is a really fair question. And I'm happy to discuss that later as we get toward the end. So Yeah, there's my sad picture. So many of my friends, when I talk to them about plant-based eating, they're just like, they get so sad. It's like they're losing a limb or something. They've decided that it's just too hard to give up meat because it just means so much to them. So what's the real deal with men and meat? Why don't we fill the chat box here? What do you think's up? Why are men so connected to all this? Why is it so hard? Why do they get so sad when we talk about taking away their meat? Social norm. Jody said it's a social norm. I think that's a big point. We'll talk about that in a sec. Habit. They've built it into their needs. They think they need it. People are afraid they'll go hungry. Yeah, well, I guess there's always that fear you're going to turn into a rabbit, right? That's always the comment that I get from male friends. Why do you keep eating like a rabbit?
Yeah, Brian, yesterday, my husband was talking with a doctor, and he went plant-based, but he lost a lot of weight, and he's lost a lot of muscle. So he's trying protein powder, but unfortunately it's not the right kind. And, it's that whole feeling that what I've lost in weight is also muscle, and I've got to have muscle from animals to build that back up.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? That's a great little mental gymnastics, right? To link those two. That like it's like the idea like if to get smarter you have to eat brains. I mean, how do animals get? I mean, I know you all know this, but there's all those clever remarks about I just eat what gorillas eat, or I eat what rhinos eat. I mean, rhinos eat plants, and they're huge and strong, and gorillas will rip you in half. I mean, they're so strong. They eat only plants, so it's possible to be big and strong and eat just plants. But we have this concept in our head that somehow the meat from an animal is going to make you stronger. So fascinating. Yeah, elephants are vegan, as Vicky reminds us. Yes, growing up to be told to eat these things or to be fearful. Rob's adding in that he lost 14 pounds, but then gained 7 back with protein supplements. Interesting. Yeah. For people who have usually the other end of the spectrum challenge, which is keeping weight on, which is generally not what we often deal with within the plant-based movement. We get people who are obese, who are trying to lose a lot of weight, but sometimes we do get the other side, which is hard keeping the weight on. So our suggestion is often to increase your consumption of things like avocados, add nuts, nut butters sometimes, depending if your cholesterol numbers are okay, and just to increase eating. You got to eat a lot more, as many of you know. You got to eat more. If you think you're going to still exist on 3 sort of medium-sized meals a day, you're wrong. I mean, I have a giant bowl of cereal every night at 10 o'clock at night, and which kind of goes against any suggestion you get about you shouldn't eat after a certain stage. But I'm hungry at 10 o'clock at night, and I eat a big bowl of cereal, and then the first thing I do when I wake up is eat a big bowl of cereal. So you got to eat more.
Yeah, and Robert was also adding to that we were both talking about the same doctor that had lost the weight and the muscle. And he's a national class swimmer. But, I think men think that. I remember an 80-year-old man told me that, he'd gone on a diet and he'd lost so much weight, he'd lost so much muscle, but he's lost fat out of his muscle, right? Is that what it is, Brian?
Correct. I mean, I think losing weight, it depends. Like if you're one of those people I have a friend who eats garbage food, and he is so skinny, and he always has had his whole life has had a trouble keeping weight on. And so for those people, we often say, you just have to eat a lot more. You have to eat things with a little bit higher calories. Like I'm a endurance athlete, and I know I've done a bunch of Ironmans, and I've done some ultra marathons. I'll use dates, and I'll use nut butters, because I just need more calories. I start to lose too much weight, and so I have to really jack it up, because my numbers are okay. I mean, when I check my cholesterol numbers, they're all right. My body seems to be able to handle it. And the challenge is that Dr. Esselstyn, so much of his time has been spent with really sick people who've been told, like, if you eat, you've already had 2 stents, 3 bypasses, and if you cheat, it's going to cause angina. And so those are the people he works with. But if your numbers are good, if your cholesterol is around 150 or below, and you have to add some nut butters in if you have a high calorie output from swimming or whatever you're doing. Plant milks, someone just wrote, is a great idea of like upping your calorie intake. Plant milks, especially if you're like looking at like almond milk, higher calories. Eat your tofu, tempeh, things like that.
Okay.
All right, so I'm going to keep moving here in the name of time. I don't want to run out of time, but here are some insights that I've gathered from looking at a lot of social research. I have to keep moving my chat box around so I can see my own slides. So research provides us some interesting insights. So here are some things to think about. Whoops. Vegetarian men are perceived to be 35% less masculine than those who follow a more standard diet. Men who eat a lot of beef are perceived to be 20% more masculine and 30% less feminine than vegetarians. So this is social research. This is doing surveying. A lot of it's anecdotal, but again, like when you're surveying a group of men, let's say 100 men or 200 men, this is what they're coming up with, is that there's really this perception around lack of masculinity. And I don't think there's a guy on the planet that really wants to be seen as not masculine. So let's take a look at some other stuff here. So when male subjects in this study were given a choice of meat or non-meat options, the greatest demand for meat came from, quote, those people who rated themselves lower in socioeconomic status. So what the researchers seemed to conclude was that actually meat eating was being seen as a substitute for with this feeling of a lack of status. So isn't that interesting? That if they felt socioeconomically that they were at a lower status, then they were much more likely to choose meat as a food choice at a meal, which is again very interesting. Just stuff to put into the hopper here as you're trying to figure it out. Many men are interested in eating less meat, but they have, quote, a hard time doing it without social permission. Men who took part in a year-long research say they experienced isolation amongst groups of male friends and acquaintances after reducing their intake of animal protein. So believe it or not, men face peer pressure from their guy friends. They get a lot of grief when they start making better nutritional choices. And we'll talk about that when we get to the solutions part of the presentation of some strategies for that. But isn't that interesting? That's actually where a lot of it's coming from. It's from peer pressure. It's very real, as Rob is saying. A refusal to give up meat consumption seems to be linked to masculinity, traditionalism, and hierarchies, all of which resemble and maintain the conventional structures of power in the Western world. Gossard, in a research study in 2003, concluded that meat consumption is not a biological necessity, but is embedded within a complex series of social forces. So really, this is our hurdle. The hurdle is not that something's gonna go wrong, that it's bad for them. It's all about social. And I know this from just, obviously being a male and for being a plant-based eater for 20 years. I can't tell you how much grief I've gotten over the years. As soon as you sit down at lunch with your giant salad, when I was a teacher, luckily I worked at some schools that had great salad bars. I would sit down with my giant salad, and every single day there was one of my male friends would have to make a comment, especially if I was sitting with my coaches group, because I was a lacrosse coach for many years. And boy, the athlete kind of jockey guys get really freaked out when you start eating that way, because it really challenges them and sort of their own choices. And again, we'll talk about that in a moment, and some of the stuff that Doug Lisle talks about. The importance of fitting in, very important, as Vicky just mentioned. So according to Richard Twine from Edge Hill University, meat remains for men a stable, if arbitrary, hook on which to hang their gender identity. Isn't that interesting? And then there's this. This is probably one of my favorite parts of the talk, is to really kind of, I'm not even going to make a conclusion about this, but I just want us to sort of grapple with this as members of a society here. So this is an ad from Burger King from not too long ago. It'll blow your mind away. So let's just take a look at the imagery in that right there. How about this one? She'll tell you size doesn't matter. She's lying. Carl's Jr. And then this is my personal favorite. This is a ham company in North Carolina, Lady Edison. They specialize in these country hams. And they're advertising here the hoofed temptress of North Carolina. So here you have the mixing of sexualized imagery with meat, which is just really interesting. Anybody have a comment about that? Anybody want to drop something into the chat box? I just find it so fascinating just to kind of try to, how does this happen, and why do people make a bigger deal about this stuff?
Well, I think what you said earlier, Brian, about that men's gender identity fits with the meat, then that's just that comes next.
Yeah, that comes next, right? Like the question that I always have is, how does this make women feel? Which I think we've gotten we've talked about that as a society a fair amount, the effects of advertising on women and the degrading of women and the commoditization of women. But I think what we don't often talk about is, what does this say about men? Like if you're a young man and you see these types of images all the time, what does that tell you as a man about yourself? Like, well, who am I as a male? I mean, I have a son who's 20 years old, and he's plant-based, and he gets a lot of grief from his friends. We were just talking about it the other day, and he just sort of ignores it. But this is the type of imagery that's out there that's formulating our cultural ideas about meat consumption.
Brian, it's interesting. Joe Lynn's made several comments about the importance of game changers and how that's changed the whole atmosphere with many men. She says that she's seen the biggest impact, but she's also saying that, the exciting part is, here's this group of athletes that are finding success in recovering from injury. But most importantly, she says, ED.
Yeah, that's all coming up in my solutions section. Absolutely. So we'll talk about that in a moment. Good points. So let's stretch our minds here. I'm going to throw some stuff at you here that's a little fringy, but I think it's interesting to when I came across it, I was like, I don't know if I fully believe this, but I really like the fact when someone writes something or does some research that has me kind of go, I wonder about that. There's a woman named Carol Adams, and she wrote a book called The Sexual Politics of Meat. And she claims in her writing and her studies is that meat is a symbol of male dominance, that actually the consumption of meat has become not just a sign of masculinity, but of dominance. She sees the process of objectification and fragmentation and consumption that connects women and animals in this culture, that actually men see the sexualization of meat is like to be that a woman is essentially someone to be salivated over and consumed, just like meat is. That there's some sort of connection there. And again, like I said, this is fringy stuff. I think it's sort of out there in the sort of vegan. There's this vegan feminist movement, which is, if you get into it, it's very interesting to read. And again, I'm still trying to wrap my brain around it, and if I just agree or not. But I think it's fascinating to think about that. To think about the idea of the male in society as the conqueror, the consumer, and how women and animals and farm animals. I mean, this is, again, this works around some of the animal and the animal movement, the animal rights movement. But I think it's interesting to consider. It's really interesting.
Brian,
Yep.
Richard says that the eating of meat is manly. So that, that kind of ties into what you're saying. That's part of the manned identity again.
Yeah. And so my question is always like, what's the next level? So why is it manly? Is it, I think the answer to that is probably like a dovetailing of a lot of different things, right? It's that traditionally men have been associated with hunting and the gathering of meat, but somewhere in there's this idea of like conquering, of being dominant, of being strong, of being all those things. And somehow in the modern society, I mean, how many men are these days are going out in the United States and killing their own meat and bringing it back and sort of doing that for their family? Not that many. But still that piece of the culture remains. And so what's the way to do that now and prove your masculinity is to grill and to maybe consume large amounts of meat to prove that. So it doesn't have anything to do anymore with the getting of meat. It's actually all now just about the consuming of meat to prove some point. And as Rob said, we live in a patriarchal society. It's true, we do. It's very interesting. So I just threw this picture up here because I said, like, once again, what does this say about men? So we know what this says about women, and this is sending a terrible message, but what does this say about guys? Like, that we're sort of these cave people who just wander around waiting for like our appetites, whether they're sexual or nutritional, to be stimulated by images like this. I mean, it's really kind of sad. And I hope you all have conversations with your sons and grandsons about this kind of stuff, because we do at our house all the time, you know, and not to ignore the fact that it exists out there. It's something that's part of our society.
Yeah, Nan mentioned that too, Brian. She's talking about, you know, that the advertising is just really strong.
It is. It is. So, I mean, watch a football game. I don't know if we'll be watching football games anytime soon, but I'm always just blown away by if you watch one football game on a Sunday, all the advertising, the high sexualization of things like beer and food, and just, you know, the preponderance of these images of fast food and junky food. And then usually after that, I'll watch the evening news, which I know makes me old fashioned to actually watch the evening news at 6 o'clock, 6:30 at night. But all the ads are for what? Viagra, all these lifestyle meds that then are the result of all the things they've advertised during the NFL game during the day. So I don't think many people catch that irony, but I find it so fascinating too, that all the ads during the evening news are all about these to try to control your blood sugars, to make sure that you can obtain an erection, to working on your high blood pressure, to your type 2 diabetes, to all these things. That's the result of the NFL game.
It makes you wonder if the food companies and the pharmaceutical companies aren't in cahoots with each other.
Oh, I think they absolutely are. Oh my goodness. I mean, I don't know if you followed the news around that the Sackler family and the opioids. I just learned this the other day. I know it's a little off topic, but I think it proves an interesting point, is that the Sackler family not only was pumping cheap opioids, Oxycontin and all these things into these communities, especially in sort of the rural South, but they were simultaneously investing in recovery programs. So they actually were building for-profit recovery programs. They were investing in that as well as the drugs that they were pushing into these. I think it's very similar. It's this idea that we're going to make money on the front end and the back end. Oh, so, you know, to sum it all up, vegetarians are less masculine. Meat's a substitute for some sense of status. Non-traditional diet choice can lead to feelings of social isolation amongst men. It's difficult to obtain social permission to eat plant-based. There are a series of complex social forces at work, and that meat consumption is tied to gender identity. So that is we're summing it all up here. And I know we're generalizing, but again, I think it's just good to have these in your mind when you start to think about, how am I going to get to my husband or my brother or my uncle or my grandparents, to get them to think about meat consumption. So let's take a minute here. What are some solutions? What do you all think might be a good way to approach this? If you have some ideas, just throw them into the chat box. And then I'm going to give you sort of the 7 pieces of wisdom that we've learned over the years about trying to convert people, but especially men.
Well, one thing that came out earlier in the chat was the game changers, and Jolene's really seen an improvement in attitudes when they've seen the movie. And Mary said that her husband and family, she's just so thankful they watched Game Changers because it began their vegan lifestyle. So
yep, I totally agree. I think, and I'll talk about Game Changers in one of my suggestions, because especially for young men, we have some friends that have used it just to get their teenage boys to start to think about healthy eating. And that's actually changed them quite a bit with Game Changers. Because and again, what does this say about men? But when you parade a bunch of really super healthy athletes up there on the screen, young people are going to pay attention, because it's very difficult to talk to young people about their long-term health. I mean, if you're 18 years old, the last thing on your mind is, gosh, what will my health be like when I'm 40? That's just not on their radar. The people that best subscribe to sort of Esselstyn diet related ideas are all people that are usually not all, but many are over 40, and they've started to have some health compromises that they now need to deal with. Those are our best clients, because we've got their attention. So Beyond Burgers. Yep. That's a good start. As much as Beyond Burgers we should never consider to be health food, it's a start. It's a place to start. The COVID threat. So people have said the COVID threat's actually gotten some people considering better food choices. Health as a value. What else? What are some other ideas here to get men thinking about? Set an example. Excellent. The best way to convert people. Be a good example. Anybody else have some other thoughts?
Well, one other thing I think, and it was mentioned earlier too about the game changers, and I can't remember who said it, but they talked about, maybe it was Lori, that the Titan football players, there was a woman cooking the food. And I know that really worked well in our house. As long as I cooked the food, then it was like, well, it was there and you can eat it. So that's,
Yeah.
that may be the best thing we can do, is just have that available.
Yeah, a lot of men are utilitarian by nature, which means that if it's there in front of them and they don't want to have to cook it themselves. So if they can just, if it's good and it's in front of them, they'll eat it no matter what it is. Yeah. So someone mentioned Charity Morgan. Yeah. So she's a professional chef, that the wife of that Titan football player. And by the way, a lot of that food, oh my goodness, a lot of that food was not healthy food, but it looked good. They were eating a lot of vegan cheeses, and that stuff looked pretty oily, a lot of deep fried things. So it was great to see that in the movie. But of course, many of us in the movement were cringing a little bit, like, oh, Titan Derek Morgan. Yeah, that's his.
Robert said that he's had success of having people listen to him when he talks about how the diet can help with athletic performance.
Oh my goodness, for sure. Recovery time, absolutely. And I think for a lot of like older male athletes who are still trying to hang in there, whether it's tennis knee or tennis elbow or that little pickup they get in their stride and they want to keep playing golf and walking the course, those types of things. We see that time and time again. When you reduce inflammation in your body, you will often, these little aches and pains will go away. We have people say, my calves bothered me for the last 10 years and I went plant-based and suddenly my calf doesn't bother me anymore. It's really quite interesting when you reduce that inflammation. All right. So here's some wisdom we can share. So here's what we've learned over the years in working with lots of different people of all different sort of backgrounds, especially men, though I have to admit, most of the people that we say that our demographic often is women ages 30 to 70. Those seem to be the people that subscribe to Jane's YouTube channel the most, who come to a lot of the events, the immersions. It tends to be kind of like a 70-30, 60-40, usually 70-30 for women to men. So men are really afraid to step into that world of maybe being vulnerable, maybe admitting that their ideas are not necessarily sound when it comes to nutrition, and they just don't want to make a change. They're a little more stubborn. So here's some wisdom we can share. Number one, so our number one strategy that we find is that if you're trying to get a guy or someone in your life to consider a nutritional change, is that peer pressure really helps. So why don't we use it to our benefit instead of letting it erode our decision making when it comes to making nutritional choices. So we find that the best is to get a partner in crime. So but really the first thing you have to do is be able to talk to the men in your life about it. And so we try to arm them with really straightforward statements. And a lot of this comes from Doug Lisle, for those of you who've heard Dr. Doug Lisle speak about how to kind of navigate this world without going crazy. And a lot of it has to do with having something ready to say. So when your friends give you grief and you say, I'm going to try this plant-based thing, you want to make it as non-threatening as possible. So you want to say, I'm going to try this for a few weeks and see how I feel. I made a bet with a friend of mine. We suggest you do that. My doc says it sounds okay, so I'm giving it a try. My doc says she wants me to do this for a few weeks. And this has now pulls away this idea that you're threatening your friends and their masculinity by saying, look, I'm making a healthier choice, and so you should feel badly about what you do. Because that's really what happens when you're with a group of friends, whether it's guy friends or if it's a group of females, and you say, I'm now making this better nutritional choice than what appears that you are doing, then you've automatically created tension in your friendship, because it seems as if you are leaving them behind by making a better choice. And so that threatens them. And so really you just have to make it sound as non-threatening as possible. I read this book, I read a couple chapters, seems like a good idea for now. I'm going to give it a try and see how I feel. And that it makes it so that people don't get so threatened. Because in the end, that's what it's about. It's not about the people that want to pick apart your protein intake. It's not about protein at all. It's not even that. I mean, obviously most of your friends, unless they're have a PhD in biochemistry, have no idea how much protein humans need. But what they do know is that when you make a better health choice, it makes them feel badly about themselves. So it's really all about their status. If you ever want to watch some of Doug Lisle's videos, Dr. Doug Lisle, Lisle, on YouTube, a lot of his talks are on YouTube for free. He talks a lot about this, is that when you make healthier choices, it scares your friends. And they're going to try to pick you apart because they don't want to lose status and they don't want to feel badly about themselves, because shame, makes people feel awful. So they want to make sure that you're not really making a good choice. They're going to ask you where to get your protein. I have a friend who ate that way and they passed out at work, or, they're going to tell you all these terrible stories because they're concerned about their own health. Yeah. And women, as Rob is saying, women can be very tough too. Absolutely. All right. So our second thing is to remember that community matters. I just touched on this a little bit, but get a partner in crime. This helps to create social pressure and responsibility. Bets. I've seen some of the most sort of hardcore stubborn men make good health choices around a bet. When I worked at a school years ago, there were two guys that I worked with who were both coaches, and they had their kind of like football coach's belly, and they both decided they wanted to lose some weight. So they decided they were going to try to go vegetarian. And of course they mocked it and made fun of it, but it became this bet who was going to lose the most weight in 30 days. And they had a big thing at the end where they both had to get on a scale, and they made a big deal about it. And then the other person had to buy the other one dinner or something. I can't remember, but that works really well for men. They love a good bet. So competitive wagers, whether it's getting social credibility by doing it in the office where you get a bunch of people together and you sort of celebrate the person that lost the most weight, that works really well. It's also not forever. So you'll notice that what we're talking about here is we're talking about doing it for short periods of time. So time frame matters. So you want to avoid for the concept of forever. Anybody who has to make a change, whether it's quitting smoking or making better nutritional choices, they're going to balk at this idea of forever, because to them right now, it feels like a loss when they're giving up something that's so dear to them in their minds. And so once you recognize that you just know that you shouldn't use the word forever. Just say, why don't we try this for a week? Why don't we try meatless Mondays? Why don't we try every other day? Whatever that is, if you can make it so that it's not permanent. Let's do 30 days and see how you feel. We're really stealing this from AA. AA has a brilliant system in place that we know research shows the AA system, as simple as it is, works really, really well. And it's because it involves rewarding people. You get your chips every time you pass a certain number of days. You sort of then can sort of re-up your commitment. And they have some very basic principles around making sure that you're not beating yourself up, that you're making amends for past mistakes, things like that. There's a system there that allows people to stay on track. And so if you just talk about it as, let's try this for a while. And if they need meat once a week, about the size of a half a deck or a deck of playing cards, we often say, Dr. Michael Clapper often talks about that a small piece of meat once a week. I think after a while, you'll start to realize that you don't need it. And that's a great way to get people thinking that way. If anybody has any thoughts or ideas they want to share, or Kathy, if you have anything to add, let me know.
Well, I just want to tell you that Debbie Zimmerman, our Food for Life instructor, that and we all know, she's getting ready to finish up a video she's done on how you can give them that deck of cards meat, but taking it and putting it together with other things. Debbie, can you come online and tell that real quick for us? Can you unmute yourself?
Yes, Kathy and Brian. So the video is really looking how to stretch the meat. And the video that we did was actually making salmon burgers. And so instead of having a salmon burger that is 6 ounces of all salmon, it's really going to be a salmon burger that's 2 ounces of salmon and 4 ounces of vegetables.
Mm-hmm.
And still be very palatable as well.
Yep. And you'll have to wait to debate Dr. Esselstyn about that. He's not a fan of transition. He's a fan of cold turkey, but he's a taskmaster, as we all know.
Well, the issue with this is not necessarily transition. It's just trying to get more plants on the plate of the one who has not committed to transitioning.
Sure, I totally agree with that. In fact, if you really asked us at the foundation to really say what are our goals, because we do a lot of pre and post surveying. With the help of this health economist at Arizona State, we put together a pre and post survey for when we do our programming. And really, in the end, what are we trying to measure? We're trying to measure that the hope that people eat more vegetables, they eat more legumes, they eat less meat, they don't drink soda anymore. You know, our goals are the same as yours, which is just to up vegetables, up the healthy food, reduce the damaging food. We don't expect everybody to become hardcore vegans, but we feel like we have to give them the information so they can make that choice fully knowledgeable.
Right.
Yeah. And that'll be on our YouTube page under the cooking classes. So watch for that. Thank you, Debbie.
All right, so our next lesson here, there we go. Wait, did I go by one? Is that right? Time frame. Erections Matter. I know this is getting down and dirty here, but for those of you who have you've seen Game Changers, you've seen Dr. Aaron Spitz. He's the guy on Game Changers who does that work with the college athletes, which is quite hilarious, I think. But the most common reason a man may experience problems with erections is blood flow narrowing in the arteries in the penis. So a whole food plant-based diet and regular exercise can prevent many of these diseases. And if you talk about one way to motivate the male psyche, I think erections is probably the greatest one, as much as they might not want to talk about it. There's not a guy out there, I promise you, that would, is willing to give up an erection for something that they eat. And so his book, Dr. Spitz has a book called, seems like for some reason my PowerPoint is, oh, there we go. The Penis Book. He actually wrote the book on penises. So if you have a man in your life that you love, might want to think about giving him this book. And as Dr. Spitz says, which is very funny, he says, I think this book is really going to help out. It's going to be very interesting to people who have penises and also for people who appreciate other people having penises.
Do you see the earrings I just got in the mail, you guys? Someone sent me eggplants.
Can't hear anybody because okay, the next one, strategy 5, is autonomy matters. There are very few men in the world that want to be dependent on other people. Autonomy is very critical to men in their male psyche. They want to be kind of these islands unto themselves. A lot of times they want to be strong. They don't want to burden their family. They don't want to be sick and weak. Yet, sadly, at least, the majority of Americans will end their lives the last 10 years being a burden on their families because of medical complications. We all know it. Many of us have lived through it with grandparents or spouses, where you see somebody get sick when they're 70 and then the next 10 to 15 years are awful, of just in and out of the hospital. And once those diseases become significant, then you're talking about just end of life quality issues where they're having to go for dialysis or they're just trying to manage their heart disease. And so there's not a man out there, again, that wants to be dependent on other people. They really want to be their own person. And I think that gets to the male psyche. I think it's an interesting conversation to have. My wife and I talk about that all the time. We don't want to be a burden to our children. We don't want them to have to take care of us for 15 years. We want to, Dr. Esselstyn and Ann are such role models in that area. They just say they want to live hard and then die fast. My son walked through. The strategy number 6 is predictability matters. That a lot of times when you're trying to change somebody's behaviors, if you start going crazy with the really fringy foods, you're really going to make people angry because it's so threatening. They don't want to try that weird quinoa white bean casserole. So we suggest you stick to the basics. Make plant strongify, as my brother-in-law says, the standards, the things that he did when he was trying to convert firefighters to becoming plant-based at his firehouse in Austin, Texas, which is which is basically in the sirloin steak strip of the world. He made spinach lasagna instead of meat lasagna, pasta with healthy pesto, without the butter, veggie burgers with tons of fixins, black bean burritos a la Chipotle. Make these big burrito bars and just give lots of toppings. I'm sure all of you have plenty of other ideas about this, but stick to the things that people recognize, especially if you're working with young people. I know our kids, it took them a long time to adjust to the fact that we eat kale that's just steamed, and we just steam a bunch of kale and throw it on the table and expect people to eat it. It took them a while to adjust to that. So we had to kind of slide the kale into the lasagna, or mix it into a chili that they might eat, or slide it into a sandwich that had other things on it. This is so important to just make it recognizable, because if you come at them with that really weird tofu scramble that just looks nothing like eggs that they really want, then you're going to scare them and they're going to get really mad. I always think of like politics, religion, and food. Those are three things that are very difficult to talk about with an open mind. People hold on to those ideas very strongly. Number 7, cost matters. If you want to get a guy's attention, talk about saving money. Grocery costs, doctor's visits, medication costs, going out to dinner, bringing your own lunches. It's all saves money. There's this misunderstanding out there that it's way more expensive to be plant-based. And for those of us who have been doing this for a while, we know that that's not the case. Now, there are some times, like if you're trying to buy organic and you're really, you're only shopping at Whole Foods, it absolutely can be more expensive. But if you do it the smart way, and you rely sometimes on frozen vegetables, which in many cases are healthier than vegetables that have been sitting out, because frozen vegetables are flash frozen right at the point that they're picked. So often they have a higher nutritional content. If you focus on stews and soups and chilies and things like that, it's not expensive at all. And if you look at the cost of meat these days, especially in this COVID crisis, where meat prices are going to continue to rise because of all the issues they've had with workers and supply chains, you're going to save money. Keep track of those monthly savings and maybe put them in a bank account. We had a friend who, over the span of 5 years, she actually kept track of the savings that she had by not purchasing meat, and she found that she saved about $10,000 over 5 years. Pretty amazing, pretty impressive. The Game Changers, as Kathy has mentioned, we're big fans of the Game Changers. My brother-in-law was one of the producers on the movie, so I have to be careful. It's a conflict of interest there. But we love the movie, and you've probably seen some of these pictures. But these 3 guys here, so the man on the left was raised by Hare Krishna parents, Nimal Delgado, and he has never had meat in his life, ever. So he was raised a strict vegetarian as a child, never has eaten meat, and look, he's huge. Now, is he eating probably plant-based protein powders? Absolutely. He's big. These guys that get big, they do that. I can't remember the guy in the middle. He's Scandinavian. He's a total plant-based eater. And then the guy on the right, Patrick Baboumian, has become a friend through this. We've met him. I should say Jane has met him. I've never met him, but he's just a sweetheart of a guy. He's a big animal rights guy. He does not eat meat at all, and he currently holds the strongman world record for the deadlift like this, where you carry a certain amount of weight a certain distance. You saw him in Game Changers. If you've seen Game Changers, these are all plant-based people. So the idea that you can't get big on plants is just not true. It's just not true. So especially for young men, this is a great one. Show them Game Changers. So final thoughts, and then I can happy to answer questions. I know we're a little bit over time here, so I apologize, but it's important to remember that knowledge alone does not drive behavior change. I love my father-in-law, but he often will say, well, I've told everybody about endothelial cells and about nitric oxide, so I can't imagine they would ever want to damage that again. And then he thinks that they can go off into the world. But I think it's important to recognize that humans are very complex organisms, and we make decisions based on a lot of things. And as much as we often like to think that our rational brain, our rational brain is the rider and the horse is our emotions, and we're really good at driving that horse wherever we want to go, that in many cases, it's the opposite. Our emotions are very strong. They drive us in directions that we don't necessarily want to admit. And it's very hard sometimes to make changes. And so just to recognize the human factor, that it's hard, whether it's peer pressure, whether it's this concepts in your mind of giving up something. For those of you, any of you out there who've ever quit smoking or have given up something like that, you know how difficult it is. You play these games in your mind about, well, oh, now I feel badly. And a lot of times, initially when you transition out of eating a standard American diet, your body will feel crappy because you're not getting that super stimulation that you're used to of all that salt, sugar, and fat that's jacked up to unnatural levels. And so you will feel badly for a little bit. It can sometimes take up to 6 months for your taste buds to readjust. And there's some strategies you can use there that we can talk about at another time. And the last thing is to try to become a choice architect for the people you love in your life. And the example that I always give at our house is I think pretty clear. So Cass Sunstein and Richard Thaler, they won the Nobel Prize in economics for studying choice architecture. And essentially what it means is that you have to make it so that people choose the right thing. So the example I give from our house is a watermelon. If you take a watermelon and sit it in the middle of our table uncut, that thing will sit there and rot. No kidding. Like, we actually had one rot the other day. We sat it on our kitchen table and just never got around to cutting it up, and it just rotted. But if you take a watermelon, we did this experiment, we chopped it into slices. So the big rinds and the kind of like a pizza slice sized ones, we put it in the refrigerator, and people ate it some of the time, but not all the time. Then we took watermelon, chopped it up into small cubes and put it in a giant bowl in the refrigerator, and it was gone in a day. So you have to make it painfully simple for people to make the right choice. Humans are lazy. We always want to conserve energy. And so if you make it difficult, if you lay out a bunch of oranges on the table, people won't eat them. But if you peel the orange and hand it to somebody next to you, they will eat it. My wife does that to me all the time. She brings oranges to events, and we just sit there, and if she hands me the orange, I'm not going to eat it. But if she hands me slices of the orange that she's pre-peeled, I will eat it. And so you just have to always remember that. Make it so that the easy choice is the healthy choice. So that means that sometimes having a bunch of cold potatoes in the refrigerator that someone can pop in the microwave for 1 minute, or having like garlic, like a walnut garlic sauce that you can dip those potatoes in. So you come home and you're hungry. Those of you who get hungry and angry at the end of the day, you can pop a bunch of those potatoes in your mouth instead of going to something that's going to be unhealthy, that you're desperate for because you're hungry, a little hangry, and you need some calories. Just make it so that the default setting is the right choice.
Doug Lisle talks about that in The Pleasure Trap.
Yeah.
About why we want to take the easy route.
Yep. So he talks about pleasure seeking, pain avoidance, and conservation of energy. That's what drives human choice. And if we can get our heads wrapped around that, we will make better choices in our life because we'll recognize what we're doing. All right, I'm happy to take questions. I know I'm running a little bit over here. I think we got started a little bit late, but I can take questions. I also there's an amazing video, if you haven't seen it. It's on YouTube. It's called Make Health Last. It's a 1-minute video that was put out by the Canadian Heart and Stroke Foundation. And so I can make sure that everybody, I'll send the link to Kathy. She can send it out. Or if you just want to write down, if you just go to YouTube and search Make Health Last on YouTube, you'll find this video. And it's incredibly powerful. It's only a minute long. And it's all about how you want.
I think we've watched that about 15 times because isn't the one, I'm glad you feel the same way about it. Isn't it the one that has, which way do you want your life to go? And it has the person in 2 different settings.
Exactly, the split screen.
Yeah. Oh, isn't that powerful? I mean, it's like, there's no choice.
Yeah, there's no choice. Really, it's really a beautiful video. It's very powerful, and it's only a minute long. And if you have somebody in your life that you're worried about making choices as they get older, it really forces that question upon them. What do you want the end of your life to look like? Do you want it to be that slow decline that so many people experience, where they're taking 15 medications and in and out of the hospital? Or do you want to live a vibrant end of your life and spend time with your grandkids, et cetera? So it's a powerful video.
I'm glad you brought that up though, because I'll put that in the show more section of our video when we put it up. Because it might be something I hadn't thought of putting it in a setting with a husband, because someone asked, and I'm not sure who it was, what Shara said, what do you do, how do you handle denial? I'm not going to get sick.
Right. Yeah, I know. It's I think what the COVID crisis has actually reminded me is that we're terrible at handling long-term challenges, but we're pretty good at addressing short-term ones. So when we have an immediate threat that drops into our world, like the COVID crisis, as humans, it's an immediate threat, and we're pretty good at being able to manage that. We're like, okay, everyone should be wearing masks. I mean, I know that there's problems there, but at least we can rally. But what we're terrible at doing is saying, okay, 20 years from now, if I don't do something now, in 20 years, I'm going to be suffering from that. Whether it's saving for retirement or it's taking care of your health, we seem as humans to be have a very difficult time wrapping our heads around that. I mean, look at climate change. Look at the issues with climate change. People refuse to accept the fact that the globe is warming, and most likely we're causing it. And yet, but we can focus on COVID, or we can focus on things that are right in our path right now. It's a very interesting human nature issue.
Linda chatted that she appreciates your suggestions because these are some of the things she's trying out with somebody she cares a lot about. So thank you for those, Brian.
Absolutely.
And Jolynn was telling us that, and several said that they agree with this, that being a model is key, isn't it?
It is. I think if you really want to talk about the best way to change people, and I've recognized this as an educator for so many years, is that just by sitting down with a plant-based meal, I've probably influenced more people than I even can imagine, because I'm not a big preacher. Like, I don't go out there and just say, hey, if you eat that, you're going to die. I'm not one of those people. I learned from Doug Lisle. As Doug always says, the number of times your success in winning nutritional fights is inversely proportional to the number of friends you have. And I think that's important to remember, that if you go in as this preacher, you're going to lose friendships. But if you just sort of set a good example, and then after a while, someone starts to ask questions because they notice that you look fit and that you seem healthy and that you have more energy and don't have that post-lunch slump all the time like they do, they'll start to ask questions. That's the best way to convert people.
Yeah. And we've got one of our members, I think Ken's still on here. Ken is going to do a healthimonial on tape. So we'll put that up on our YouTube, and the path he took when he changed his diet and put more plants on the plate. He's also doing a cooking class, a cooking show with his wife, and the kind of food they like to eat. So we'll have that available. So are there any more questions?
Rob's embarrassing me. He's saying I look marvelous.
I think sometimes if you can just be the person that somebody feels they can ask questions of, like, let them come to you, because then they're at least curious, at least interested in an answer to something that they wonder about, and start slow. You can't hit people with everything at one time. You just got to take them where they are.
Like I said, religion, politics, and food, they're very difficult to have rational conversations about, because so much is tied up with food. If food was just about nutrition, my father-in-law would be absolutely right. Like, look, here's the information. Why don't you change? But in fact, food is about so many other things. It's about family. It's about tradition. It's about identity. It's about celebration. It's about reward. It's about all these things that we forget. And so those little treats you give yourself, oh, I went running today, so I can have that dessert at night. I mean, it's such the weaving together of all that food is what makes it so difficult to make better choices. And I think Adam Sudd, who I love, if you've seen Adam Sudd speak about addiction and food, he has the best line, which is, it's the difference between what you want now and what you want most. That every day when you're facing those temptations where somebody puts something in front of you that you really want to eat because you know it's going to taste good, you have to stop yourself and say, what do I want most? Because we all know what we want most is to live a healthy, vibrant, engaged life that's not full of disease, yet we often choose what feels good now. And if we can keep that in mind, it's almost like a tattoo everybody should have on their arm, then you'll make the better choice.
Yeah, that sounds great. Okay, well, Brian, thank you so much. That was tremendous. It really got me thinking about some men that in my life. My husband's already made the change, but there are others that I would love to see change, and some good strategies there. Okay, so as we finish up, thank you all for coming. This has been an exciting session, and I loved all the participation. That was really good. I'm hearing great presentation, Brian, in the chat. And as we look ahead to August, we've got an international one coming up, August the 27th, and it's a little unusual because it's at 8 o'clock at night, but that's because we are Zooming with someone from Okinawa, and they're 12 hours ahead of us. So it'll be 8 o'clock in the morning for them. And that'll be Suko, who is an Okinawan guide who takes people to visit the centenarians in that blue zone. So we hope you'll join us for that. There will only be room for 100 people in Zoom. We'll put it on live stream, YouTube, as well as on Facebook. So when it goes up this weekend on Eventbrite, you may want to go ahead and get registered because it fills up pretty fast.
And Kathy,
Yes.
I'm going to leave the chat. I'm going to leave the room open and the chat open for a little bit. If you want to just everybody, if you have any other questions or you have anything that you want to say for a few minutes after this is over, we're going to leave the chat room open for a bit.
Well, thank you all for the opportunity to speak. And you know, with being a member of the Esselstyn family, you know, you give us 2 people in a room, and we'll happily talk about plant-based eating. So if I can be of any service to anybody, reach out. And just a plug quickly for the Esselstyn Foundation is we are partnering with existing nonprofits to get this message out. So if you have a nonprofit in your area, a school, a rural health clinic, a charity hospital, a group of nurses, any sort of nonprofit affiliated group, YMCA, and you want us to bring some programming there, reach out, and we do it for free. All of our programming is free of cost. So if you want to learn more, you can go to esselstynfamilyfoundation.org. I'm sure Kathy will have the information, and we would love to partner with your organization. So with that, I'll let you talk amongst yourselves. Thank you so much for your time. Much appreciated.
Thank you, Brian.
Take
Thanks
care.
so much, Brian. Okay, well, we had a good group here today. Was there anything anybody, you can, if you want to, unmute yourself and speak out if you'd like to. Oh, and Sam, you can start the live streaming, and Vicki,